Kostya rose from his meal with a contented grin. It felt phenomenal returning home after a year-long absence. As he went to collect the used dishes, his mother stepped in, gesturing for him to back off. "You must be exhausted from your travels. You should rest while I clean up," she insisted. Despite Kostya objecting that he wasn't weary, his mother continued to usher him away. With a sigh, Kostya exited the house. Nestled under the eave were a pair of porch swings, the favored tea-sipping spot for Kostya's parents. He sank into one, shutting his eyes for a moment, relishing the familiar comfort of his childhood home. His gaze roamed over the scenery, the seasoned pear tree he used to climb, and the run-down bench where gangs of jovial youngsters spent their evenings. Adjacent to his home on the left, Kostya's childhood friend had once lived. After enlisting, his friend moved across the country, found a wife, and eventually brought his parents to live with him. The property was now occupied by a young couple with a toddler, whom Kostya planned to introduce himself to later. The house on the right belonged to the perpetually moody elder, Stepan, until he passed away during Kostya's high school years. It remained vacant for a long time before welcoming a Chinese immigrant family. They later moved to seek better opportunities, starting a footwear business that appeared to thrive. Kostya recalled the neighborhood children flocking over to witness the new family's unique spectacle. The Chinese household had 2 children, a school-going adolescent boy and a cute baby girl who endeared herself to the local boys. Initial curiosity saw Kostya inviting neighbors to say hello, but that changed the day he noticed the girl crying after being frightened by the spectators' laughter. From then on, nobody trespassed on their property. Just because the family looked different didn't mean they were an exotic exhibit. They were human beings too. Kostya drifted into a reverie as he gazed at his neighbor's house, pondering their current status. During his brief previous visits home, he hadn't had the inclination or opportunity to delve into their affairs. As if in answer to his musings, the neighbor's door flung open, and a loud uproar in a foreign language erupted before quickly being muted as the door slammed shut. Kostya laughed heartily, ready to retire indoors, when a soft whimper caught his attention. Intrigued, he moved over to the fence, bending down to spot a young girl huddled on the other side, softly weeping. "Hey there, what's the matter? Something bothering you?" he questioned. The young girl jolted, a fearful expression distorting her face as she took in the stranger. She was but a child, with raven hair and alluring eyes. As Kostya studied her features, he was taken aback to realize she was the same little girl everyone in the neighborhood once flocked to see. "Don't be frightened," he quickly assured her, displaying open hands. "I'm your next-door neighbor, Kostya. Remember me? It's been a while since I visited my folks here. You've probably forgotten I was around." The girl sniffled, rubbing her nose, then nodded. "I remember you. Is something troubling you? Can I help somehow?" Kostya repeated his query. The young girl glanced at the house, sighed deeply, and snuffled again. "He wants to kill our dog, and I don't want him to suffer." Her eyes watered again. At first, Kostya chuckled, dismissing her proclamation as a tall tale. Kill a dog for food? But the child's distress spoke volumes. Every part of her screamed the seriousness of her claim. The laughing smirk soon vanished from his face. He felt a surge of concern and began questioning the girl, and the more he understood, the more he was taken aback. Lynn still resided with her parents and her sibling Shan. Their family business was thriving, with Shan receiving extensive training to eventually take over. He didn't just have one shop, but 3 bustling shoe shops. Noticing their son flourishing, the parents decided to visit distant relatives in their ancestral land. What was meant to be a 1-month break turned into an elongated stay, and Shan's attitude soured. Known for his stubbornness, he began arguing frequently with Lynn, even threatening to send their 5-year-old dog to the butcher the very next day, claiming that using the dog for meat would prevent waste. "You folks aren't Korean," Kostya nervously chuckled. "What do Koreans have to do with any of it?" Lynn was bewildered. "They're the ones who eat dogs," Kostya clarified. "The Chinese culture includes certain culinary preferences. In the last century, it's become less common and more of a fascination among the affluent. It's considered a delicacy. Dog meat is seldom heard of in advanced city areas, but can still be found in secluded parts." Sean investigated ancient national dishes and decided to experiment. "Our pet is ailing. My sibling thought he could use her in a beneficial manner. Aline resumed sobbing while Kostya stood there, aghast. She wouldn't really resort to that, would she? She's such an adorable pet, the young girl cried. If my parents were around, they would never let her be taken away. But right now, my elder brother's running the show. Perhaps you can rescue the pet. Lynn looked at Kostya with such hope that it made him uneasy. He inquired when Sean intended to discard the dog and pledged to devise a plan. The girl, pleased, thanked him and retreated indoors, leaving Kostya dumbfounded. On one hand, everything Aline suggested seemed illogical. But who would seriously eat a dog? On the other, the girl's firm confidence made him believe her. Another unsettling memory surfaced. Sean and Lynn, as children, catching grasshoppers in the adjacent field. When questioned about the purpose of the insects, their surprise was palpable. Their reply that they fried and savored them was surprising. Grasshoppers may not be dogs, but who can predict certain cultural practices? Engrossed in his thoughts, Kostya headed home. Even if he defended the unidentified dog, what would happen next? In a week, he would depart again. Leaving the pet behind and burdening his parents with added responsibility wasn't viable. There wasn't a single neighborhood friend left from his childhood. Unsure of whom to consult, he received a message on social media from an old classmate proposing to meet. Eager, Kostya shared his updated phone contact. Before he could hit send, his phone rang. "Kostya, we haven't connected in a while," Timur exclaimed amidst the noise of barking dogs. "Do you run a small pet kennel?" Kostya humorously asked. "Nearly," Timur responded. "I have a pair of dogs, and they are exceptionally vocal while fighting over their toys." Kostya reminisced about his fellow students' adoration for dogs and narrated his neighbor's story. Timur, unable to believe it, vowed to come by in the morning. The next day, Kostya heard loud voices from the neighboring lot. As he stepped outside, he spotted the brother and sister. Lynn was obstructing Sean's path, but he persisted, nudging her aside. Kostya quickly intervened, greeting them and asking about their affairs. As Sean responded, Kostya stepped into their yard. There was no sign of a dog, not even a sound, which made Kostya question the validity of the girl's words. She might have been influenced by something. Sean seemed amicable, and the discussion was convivial. Then Timur showed up. As the men were about to leave, Lynn approached the car's open trunk and removed a cloth revealing its contents. Kostya gasped, and Timur cursed. A dog was indeed present, lying down with its legs bound and face concealed, panting without effort to struggle. The most alarming sight was a giant lump on its belly. It looked like a water bag attached to the creature. "Are you getting her medical aid?" Timur questioned anxiously. "No, she's going to the slaughterhouse," Sean replied nonchalantly. Timur was taken aback, unable to digest what he had just heard. The neighbor shrugged. "She's going to meet her end anyway. At least some benefit can be salvaged. We'll have predictable vet bills and chunks of meat as a plus. Aren't you upset about an animal that has been your neighbor for so long?" Sean's nonchalance surprised Kostya. "She's merely a dog," Sean dismissed. "But she is ill. Aren't you worried about catching something?" Kostya attempted another perspective, but that failed too. The guy casually dismissed this with a comment about all microbes disappearing during butchering. Both Kostya and Timur were keen to take the dog in, but Sean declined. So the friends offered to trade the dog for store-bought meat. Sean pondered, smirked slyly, then quoted an extravagant price. Kostya and Timur were flabbergasted at such impudence. Even if the dog had been in perfect health, she wouldn't command such a price. Kostya began the negotiation at 100, but Sean scoffed. His sister, witnessing the scene, suddenly broke into tears. Recognizing her brother's stubbornness and feeling hopeless, knowing he wouldn't relinquish the dog easily. Still, Kostya and Timur remained persistent. They bargained until they reached an agreement at 1,000. "I didn't anticipate spending my entire salary this way," Kostya sighed, flipping through the cash. "What assurance do we have that you won't find another dog from the nearby junkyard?" Timur inquired harshly. "I didn't want this one to begin with," Sean grumbled, distracted by his freshly earned cash. His sister discovered the puppy. "Take it up with her. We don't need any additional animals to look after in this house." On cue, Lynn went into damage control mode, promising there wouldn't be any more dogs, cats, or even hamsters. While Lynn worked on mitigation, Kostya and Timur liberated the canine from its agonizing confines. The desperate hope in the dog's eyes was almost too much for the men. The creature had clearly suffered greatly. Its limbs were bound so tightly that the rope had chafed against its skin, and the aligned injuries suggested it had been pulled by its bound paws. The moment the ropes were cut, the animal released a deep sigh, twitched, then sagged. Lacking strength, it was Timur who ended up cradling the dog. Leaving their neighbor's property quickly, they decided to take the pup to the animal clinic. While Kostya backed their vehicle out of the garage, Timur attempted to get the dog to sip some water. The dog lapped it up eagerly, but lacked the strength to keep its head up for long. Throughout the journey to the clinic, Timur was irate. He couldn't comprehend the heartlessness of someone willing to abandon a creature considered a loyal companion for nearly 5 years. The telltale signs of illness in the dog were apparent. Timur's concern grew. It wasn't possible for such a massive swelling to form overnight. The animal must have been suffering for months. Rather than obtaining medical attention, the previous owner had used it instead. A bitter expression overtook his face. "I detest the Chinese. This is where you get it wrong," Kostya countered, shaking his head. "In my line of work, I deal with several Chinese individuals. After our discussion yesterday, I relayed the dog's situation. They unanimously decided to pull in for Shan's treatment. They clarified that cruelty towards animals is usually committed by unenlightened individuals from remote regions, and the majority do not condone such harshness. So refrain from generalizing." Timur struggled to hold back tears, yet continued murmuring. The veterinarian he regularly patronized for his pets was their selection. Upon understanding the state of the pup, the vet immediately attended them without delay. When the men narrated the dog's ordeal, the vet's facial expressions mirrored outrage. Aside from the tumor, some injuries from the ropes, and obvious exhaustion, the doctor also uncovered a critical ear infection and an underlying skin issue. The odds of survival looked bleak. "I am unsure of my advice for you." The vet helplessly shook his head. "The treatment will be costly and long. I can't guarantee a successful outcome, so you might end up spending thousands of rubles fruitlessly and still be unable to save the dog. To ease its pain, I could perform euthanasia. But the decision lies with you." Kostya and Timur exchanged glances. They were meeting the dog for the first time today, but they couldn't bring themselves to euthanize the creature without giving it a fighting chance. They decided Kostya would foot the bill for the surgery, and Timur would take the dog home for recovery. If the dog's condition deteriorated after the tumor removal, they would put it to sleep. The dog was swiftly taken into the operating room for anesthesia. The men decided to step out for a quick coffee. The sight of the dog's tumor loomed like an extra abdomen, nerve-wracking. But the vet proceeded, ridding the excess. The dog was moved to a kennel. Upon seeing the pup, Timur and Kostya barely recognized it. The enormous bulge was gone, making the dog appear alarmingly skinny. Even as it lay motionless, eyes half closed and tongue sticking out from the anesthesia, they saw hope. After a few days of monitoring, the vet promised to send the tumor for medical analysis, reassuring them that he would call Timur once the results were in. After paying for the surgery and biopsy, they decided to part ways temporarily. Lynn peeked out her window, and the instant Kostya reached home, she dashed out, spying at him with a questioning look. Kostya had no intention of engaging with the neighbors. He subtly acknowledged Lynn and stepped inside his home. This wasn't the vacation he had envisioned. On their way back, the men detoured towards the police station, eager to seek some form of justice. It was inevitable that Sean would not face any penalties, but they fervently hoped for a fine to assert the respectful treatment of dogs in their town. However, exhaustion set in for Kostya and Timur, causing them to retreat home. The authorities should have been alerted immediately, not after the creature was apprehended. Moreover, dealing with foreigners was not appealing for anyone. Hence, their friends were requested to intervene. The next day, Timur phoned with delightful news. The growth was benign, circumventing the need for euthanasia. This meant that someone could now care for the dog. A friend pledged not to forsake the creature and would provide care once medical experts gave the green light. Kostya felt torn, realizing that Timur would never have known about the dog if he hadn't spoken up. It felt like he had inadvertently transferred the responsibility of caring for the ailing dog to Timur. Yet it was evident that Timur would not renounce the dog now. feeling accountable. Furthermore, his affection for dogs was well known. Kostya recalled a time when Timur walked into school drenched and muddied, scolded by their teacher. Disclosing the story of rescuing a puppy from the river, Timur faced another round of scolding from his parents and fell ill for weeks after the incident. When reunited with friends, he declared his readiness to repeat the river dive if it meant saving an animal. In his mind churning with ways to assist, Kostya headed to the animal doctor. There he covered the cost of the suggested treatment course. The dog's condition remained daunting. Kostya wished the vet success with the dog's healing process. Later in the evening, grateful Timur reached out, offering the money back, but Kostya turned it down. The rest of the week passed without another encounter. Following this, Kostya headed back to his work city, and the memory of this incident gradually faded. 2 years later, he managed to visit his parents again. His mom held him captive at the table with incessant conversation and steady replenishment of food. Finally managing to break free for fresh air, Kostya stumbled upon an elderly duo behind the adjacent fence. Intrigued, he asked his parents about the family that had disappeared. They explained that they had moved back to China about a year and a half ago for better job opportunities. His parents added that their son had chosen to stay behind, sold his share in the business, and set out to conquer Europe. Kostya couldn't help but laugh at the strange turn of events. It would certainly not be appreciated if he opts to consume a canine there, so let him strive. At that instant, Timur sprang to his thoughts. Kostya connected just to greet him, and by dusk, he was already welcomed into Timur's home. Timur guided him to the backyard towards the barbecue grill. 3 joyous and content fur friends frolicked on the lush lawn. One appeared somewhat recognizable to Kostya. "Is it really?" He broke into amazement. "She?" Timur acknowledged. "Daisy, come over." Daisy promptly dashed to her owner, peering up with loyal affection in her eyes. She bore no resemblance to the frail creature Kostya last saw in the veterinarian clinic. Daisy had filled out a little, her previously bare belly now adorned with shiny fur, and her once timid gaze transformed into a firm, resolute one. While Kostya scrutinized Daisy with interest, Timur narrated the lengthy and arduous journey of her rehabilitation. Daisy's stay in the veterinary clinic had to be prolonged more than expected. She couldn't seem to regain strength from fatigue, weakness, and an advancing ear infection. Medical professionals devoted their attention to her around the clock. It was only after a week of continual treatment that Daisy could be released to her home. Though not entirely healed, she ambled around with an elevated collar and a slight neglect of cleanliness. Timur kept Daisy isolated from the other pets to prevent contagion. Once the stitches healed, she was bathed thoroughly, and her skin tended to for mange. Her ear maintenance demanded Timur's continual attention, prompting him to learn how to administer injections. After Daisy's physical recuperation, Timur aimed to rejuvenate her spirits. The pet demonstrated fear in barking, startled movements around the house, and hesitations in engaging with the other 2 dogs. Timur deduced she must have endured some form of ill treatment or punishment. He spent months encouraging her to comfortably assimilate into his home. She became close with all the household members and ceased startling at abrupt sounds. "I'm so pleased you visited your parents' home that day," Timur expressed. "Daisy is such a delight. I hold my deepest gratitude to you for her